Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. For those of you who are just tuning in, my name is Lindsey Funtik, and I am the coordinator of volunteer ministries at Ashland First United Methodist Church. And every Thursday, I hop on here to share a little bit about what the Lord is teaching me and some of my devotional thoughts for this week. So, welcome. The Lord has really been challenging me this week, so I hope that you are kind of blessed by what He's been working on in me and that it kind of speaks to your life. So I've been thinking about the idea of impatience, and we are all waiting for something. We're all kind of hoping for something. And oftentimes it can feel like we're really not in control of that timeline. And it made me think about when I was a little girl, specifically when I started wearing makeup, maybe like, I don't know, 14. I remember I loved getting ready for church because it was sort of a weekly opportunity to, get gussied up and show off for people who loved me enough to fawn over me. And while I was I was in the bathroom, I was getting ready, I was enjoying the process. My poor father was in the kitchen tapping his toes because he knew what time we needed to leave to get to the service before it started. And he was sort of at the mercy of my timeline. So God bless that man. He is a saint. But it kind of got me thinking about how often I do that with God, that God is doing God's thing. God is being good. God is being God. But I'm tapping my toes thinking that I know exactly what needs to happen. So it's not a perfect parallel because I'm not God, and my dad actually did know what time we needed to leave. But it also brought to mind another story from Scripture that I absolutely love. And it's from Mark 5, starting in verse 25, I believe. And it's the story of the bleeding woman. And I love this story. I've always been drawn to the woman. So Jesus is approached by a man named Jairus, whose daughter is dying. And so Jesus is on his way to heal his daughter, to help Jairus out. But on the way, he meets a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. And in that time and in that culture, to be bleeding for 12 years means she was unclean for 12 years. It says that she'd consulted all the physicians, that no one had an answer, but this was sort of her last-ditch effort. And she touched the hem of Jesus's robe and was healed. So not only does she touch his robe, he also stops to talk to her and says that her faith has healed her. So I have always been drawn to the bleeding woman in this story. I think it's just such a magnificent example of God's goodness and kindness and desire to stop and talk with us no matter who we are. But I think that I often forget the other character in this story, which is Jairus, who he approached Jesus. My daughter's dying. Let's go. And so Jesus says, okay, let's go. And on their way, he is taking his sweet time. And then in the time that he's talking, verses 35 and 36 says, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. So as I've been thinking about impatience, I've been thinking about Jairus. That while he was in this crisis, while he had a plan, it was set, things were going fine, and then he was kind of at the mercy of Jesus's timing. And I really kind of relate to Jairus. I think that we all can sometimes, is that we can say, yeah, God, I trust you, but let's go, come on. Hustle through this crowd. Why are you stopping to talk to people? And for any of us that are feeling that sort of impatience, that you're waiting for something, I just kind of want to share some of the thoughts that have been encouraging me this week, and hopefully encourage you as you process your own season of waiting, your own season of wondering what God is doing, why he's paused, why he hasn't come to deliver you yet. So the first is, much like last week, I encouraged us to be upfront and real when we feel overlooked. And I make the same point this week that we need to let God in on our struggle. When we are feeling impatient, when we are feeling like he might have, when he might not be hustling as much as we think that he needs to hustle, I think that there's power in letting God know those things. There's power in praying this out and having a conversation with the Lord about it. When I think about the bleeding woman, he paused to listen to her in her struggle. When he heard from Jairus, both before and after the bleeding woman, he paused to listen to Jairus in his struggle. And between Jairus' daughter being sick and the woman bleeding for 12 years, I trust that both of these characters are examples of patience and or impatience. They're waiting, they're trusting, they're hoping, but it's been a while. So the first thing is that just let God know how you're feeling. He's listening to you, and he wants to be in that struggle with you. There's power in sharing with him, and there's also power in prayer. So have that conversation and be real with God. It's easy to say, oh, I trust you in your timing, but do you actually feel that in your heart? Wrestle that out with the Lord. Wrestling is worth it. So second, don't let the blessing that you're waiting for negate the grace that's unfolding in front of you. So as Jairus was, I imagine, like bouncing on the balls of his feet, maybe like, come on, Jesus, come on, trying to get him to work his way through this crowd, Jesus was doing something miraculous and for this woman. And I think that oftentimes when we are trying to hustle God, we don't pay attention to what's going on in front of us. And that can be in our own lives, where we can stop and look around and say, okay, actually, I might be waiting for this blessing, but here's a billion others that you've given me. Let me reflect on what's here and now in front of me. And I think also there's an element of selflessness in this. Now, I'm not sure what was going through Jairus' head. The scripture doesn't tell us. But I like to imagine that he might have paused and said, okay, he's doing something miraculous here. Maybe he'll do something miraculous for me. But I think that while we are sometimes freaking out, a miracle can be happening around us. So as we're waiting, as we're trying to hustle God, as we are seeking to be patient, my encouragement for myself and for all of us is just to look around and notice what God is doing now, instead of always kind of charging full speed ahead toward what we want him to do and when we want him to do it. So third, read the end of this story. Verses 41 and 42 said, Jesus gets to the house of Jairus. Jairus' daughter is dead. He's like, she's not dead, she's sleeping. And everybody laughs at him. But he goes to the little girl's bedside and said, he took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. So, in our seasons of waiting, in our seasons of impatience, I encourage us to remember God's character. That the same God who heard the bleeding woman and paused to talk to someone who was unclean is the same God that showed up just in time. And not in the timing that Jairus had, certainly, but in the time that he had, and it was perfect. And so he doesn't always show up like we expect him to, but he always shows up. And we might not get the thing that we are hoping for, that we are expecting exactly as we expect it, but the Lord's blessing is real, and he's not late. He wasn't late then, and he isn't late now. So whatever you're waiting for, whatever you might feel impatient about, I encourage you just to talk it out with God, to focus on what's in front of you while still hoping for the future, and to remember God's character, because it is a good God who raised this little girl from the dead, despite her father's timeline being thrown for a loop. And the same goes for us. So, friends, with that, I hope that you have a really good week. My prayer is that we would feel comfort in knowing that God's timing is the best timing, that God's ways are higher than our ways, and that we can trust him. So, First United Methodist, I love you. I'm thinking of you. I am praying for you, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon.